Welcome back to Sovereign AI podcast. I am Maria Axente, and in this series, we explore what it really means for nation, companies, and individuals to shape their own future with AI. Today, we're talking about something that doesn't always get enough attention when it comes to sovereignty debate: data. To unpack this, I'm joined by Karl Havard, Chief Commercial Officer at NScale, the hyperscaler purposely engineered for AI. Karl, well, welcome. It's great to have you here. Let's start first with you. Could you tell our listener a little bit about who you are, what you do, and of course, what NScale is building?
Thanks for inviting me, Maria. Yes, I'm Karl Havard. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at NScale. I've been in the IT industry, the cloud industry, which then obviously has traversed into machine learning, AI, etc. Probably for too long, 20-ish years, so maybe slightly more. So I've seen quite a bit of movement and change in the marketplace, not just from a technology point of view, but also from a cultural point of view. And I think the subject matter we are going to discuss is a blend of both there. So there's a lot of elements that will touch on technology, but also key elements that will touch on cultural aspects and also legislation too. But what we're building at NScale, as you quite rightly said, and thanks for using our tagline, the hyperscaler purpose engineered for AI, we are coming out of the UK and Europe, and unlike 20 years ago when the cloud service providers sort of all emerged out of the US, because of the onset of generative AI, agentic AI, and infrastructure required in order to bring that to life, there's a whole different type of data center required. We saw that as an opportunity to actually create something which could be an alternative, sovereign alternative, really for organizations across EU and UK. So we're on a mission to build that out. 2 years old now. And we're starting last 12 months, actually. We've made a lot of good progress in certain areas, both commercially, but also working with the UK government as well.
When you and NScale talk about sovereign AI, what's at the heart of it, and where, of course, data fits into this equation?
Yeah, so sovereignty on its own, I think, is a generic term which probably doesn't mean anything. I always believe you have to prefix it with the territory or the region or the kingdom that you're applying a sovereign solution to. So if I take UK sovereignty as the first example, then for us at NScale and for me personally, that means that you initially are a UK domicile organization. So you sit in the land that you are offering sovereign solutions to, and you offer that service, whether it's AI services or solutions, through a UK domicile platform. So that also means, from a legislation point of view, you are subject to the laws of the land that you reside in and not subject to the laws of the land overseas. And what I refer to there is clearly the Cloud First Act and the Patriot Act. So one of the benefits I think the UK government and also UK PLC and big enterprises and startups can see with us is that if they select us as a partner to serve their AI solutions and they come onto our infrastructure and we serve it from a UK entity, then that does mean that their data is not subject to interrogation from potentially the US. It's the Patriot Act was called. The other element of sovereignty is what I would call control, and that is who controls access to your AI infrastructure or the data loads that you are working on. And a lot of it is sensitive data. And that means who controls your login, for one. And physically, can you go and visit the AI infrastructure or the infrastructure that you are working with? Or do you need a passport to go and visit it? Ideally, it's a case that true sovereignty and transparency associated to organizations that work with us, we will happily take them to the data centers. We will give them full access to that should they need to, in a secure way, of course. So that's one aspect as well. When you mention data sovereignty, that's a really interesting concept because I think there may be some misinterpretation in the market as a whole about data sovereignty, because data residing in the kingdom that you wish for it to reside in is important, but does that mean you still have access to that data? And I'll use an example. So some of the hyperscalers, US hyperscalers, they will offer solutions where they will locate infrastructure into the premise of the customer that they are serving. And that could be, overseas in a territory. So just by physicality, you believe that because of the machines and the computers is in your kingdom or your region, then you conform to data sovereignty. The reality is that some of those solutions, even though physically located in those areas, still don't offer true physical or digital access to the customer in that area. You still have to go via a portal which is controlled in a different region. So the physicality of data sovereignty is an interesting concept. So when we talk about a UK sovereign AI, then physically you're located in a data center in the UK. You are served from a UK domicile organization. You have access to your logins. You have access physically to the infrastructure should you want to. And then you're not under the laws of a foreign land. The other aspect is it should directly boost the economy of the kingdom that you are in. UK sovereignty, for our example, is if we're UK domicile, we deploy US technology, but we repatronize it into the UK and we serve it from a UK point of view, then all the revenue that comes through our infrastructure stays within the UK itself. It doesn't touch the UK and then end up elsewhere. So it's sovereignty is a small word, but it encompasses so many different things, and this is our view of it.
We were talking earlier about the importance of the two pillars, obviously infrastructure and data. Can we explore a little bit more about this duality of infrastructure and data and how they enforce each other? Are they inseparable, you think?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, where else do you put the data if you haven't got the infrastructure? And I guess it's how you define the infrastructure. If you think about infrastructure within a data center, then absolutely it's key. You need the generative AI, agentic AI, compute power and GPUs. You need the necessary networking inside the data center. You need the switching and also the storage as well. But I think when we talk about our infrastructure, that's another term which will have dual interpretation, because the infrastructure also goes beyond the data center. It's the energy that powers and cools the infrastructure, and sources where that comes from. Data will only remain alive if you have good sources of energy in order to keep things up and running. And ideally, it's renewable wherever it possibly can be. But then you've got the wider networks across the data centers. So, how do clusters in different regions move workloads around? How do we infer or inference, various applications out to the edge and across the internet? And that requires, a wider view of the infrastructure required to do that. And of course, there's a lot of data being moved around, especially when training. And therefore, you need, probably improved data networking across the various data centers within the sovereign kingdom itself. But of course, for collaboration between countries, we also need that in place also. So I honestly don't think they can go
One without the other.
well, yeah, exactly. You can't separate. I'm just working out in my head how you could do that. I don't think you can. I think they are inseparable. They have to go together.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about what it means to train systems on data collected as elsewhere. What do you think we lose when data behind those models isn't grounded in our own language, industries, and culture?
It's a great question because, there's English and there's English. It's that we would currently rely on typically foundational models that are coming out of, places like OpenAI, Meta, Google, etc. And they're all trained in their own way, and they are amazing at what they do. But when I say English and English, I mean, Josh Payne, our CEO, he's Australian. And we had a conversation, and I'm British, I speak English. And we had a conversation in the summer talking about how the temperature in the UK was increasing, and it was a bit like the Australian climate. And I said, well, I'm not really used to it. And he said, yeah, we'll all be walking around with our thongs on. And Australians call flip-flops what we call in Britain that you put on your feet thongs. And therefore, just that misinterpretation in itself. You can imagine an Australian-based English foundational model and a UK one, or even a US one, and there being that little bit of confusion there. I do think as we progress going forward, each sovereign nation will need to, and also want to, create its own foundational model in order to represent the nuances of language, its own culture in its own way. And therefore, when, I don't know, UK organizations speak to the various dialects across the Newcastle, Scotland, Wales, all different. You've got that as well, yeah. So ideally, we get to a point where agentic AI and AI assistants will be able to communicate effectively to those various groups. In fact, we're about to see a Brit LLM emerge, which includes the Welsh language as well, which is great. Long may that continue. And then, of course, when you move into Europe, you take Switzerland. I think there's mainly 4, potentially 5 different languages spoken over there. You can understand, in the Benelux countries and France, Flemish, French, etc. You can see the need for true local foundational models to be created, and I think that's where we will head. I hope we do, because that way you then start to talk about true sovereignty. Not in the ability of compliance legislation or where things reside, the true language and culture represented effectively to benefit the citizens of each sovereign nation, ideally. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting space we're at. We're currently again relying upon the big companies coming out of the west coast of the US, but hopefully we'll get to a point where we do have the ability to be a little bit more self-sufficient and develop our own individual languages. And then where does that then stop? Which is really interesting. So as well as having your own country specific foundational models to represent the culture and language of where you're at, where does that then go from there? Do you then have local councils in the UK having their own specific Geordie language or whatever? We probably won't reach that point, but hopefully we do get to the point where we do have each nation's own foundational model.
How do you think governments and enterprises and startups make sure that though the systems they're building are genuinely built on national values?
Yeah, I think it is a huge challenge stroke opportunity. So if you take each different nation, and I do agree with what Jensen has said there, it is important for each nation to represent itself, represent its own true values. And I think when you look at the hierarchy of values for each nation, it's sometimes quite difficult, even putting AI to one side, to determine what those values are. I mean, because culturally and our interaction with different countries as humans, we can quite quickly see the different belief systems that are in place. So I think there is a job to try and define that and put the guardrails in place to be able to say, these are the key pillars that represent the values of our culture and our kingdom that we're in. And ideally across, various nations, we share some similar values. So that's great. Putting that into an AI model or set of models needs some form of agreement, doesn't it? I mean, who defines what the values and cultures of
Exactly.
the UK are, for example? What are the origins of those values? So I think it is a challenge, and I don't think you'll please everybody, because we're a very diverse country in the UK, which is great. And there are different value systems accordingly, but I think we all sit under the umbrella of what the key values of our nation stands for, as does every nation. So if we can define that and find that as a way to ensure that the right set of biases are included in the model, that would be great. But I think the bigger challenge is outside of AI. It's actually defining what the values of each nation is. Who would do that? Is that the role of a government? Probably not, because as we know, personalities inside government change. Different parties emerge very quickly, and elections happen. Does that mean we have to revisit the values of our nation on a regular basis and retrain? Hopefully not. Hopefully, as a nation, we can find a way to define what they are. But I think it's a very difficult job to do. And maybe the other way to approach it is just based on the the citizens of the UK and how we train our models at the moment in time, or we intend to train our models. Maybe the nuances trickle up from the general public into that, and then we can define the values of the nation by default that way, as long as they are obviously law-abiding values and all that good stuff. Yeah, we need to put the guardrails in place, obviously prevent any hallucinations going off down different paths that we don't want to go down. So a reiterative training process. Hopefully, that will come as a default, and we won't need some overarching body that says these are our values. Ideally, it comes from the people within each nation.
Thank you for such a rich conversation.
No, thanks, Maria. It's been a pleasure.